The night she said it, the backyard smelled like cedar smoke, and the neighbor's late summer barbecue drifting over the fence. We were standing outside my daughter's place in Barrie, her little rented house on the edge of town, the one with the crooked gate that I kept meaning to fix but never did. My ex-wife had come for our daughter's engagement party. It wasn't my idea to invite her. It was our daughter's, and I understood why. She was trying to hold two worlds in the same room for one night, and I respected that. I would have walked across broken glass for that girl. Still would. My ex-wife found me alone by the back fence, where I was standing with a bottle of Sleeman's I wasn't really drinking. She tilted her head the way she always used to, that small, satisfied angle, and she said quietly enough that no one else could hear, "You know what your problem always was? You were nothing without me holding you up, and you still are." Then she walked back inside like she'd just commented on the weather. I stood there a moment. The smoke drifted. Someone laughed loudly inside. I didn't say anything back. I didn't have to. But I did make a decision, standing by that crooked fence in Barrie, holding a beer I didn't want. I decided I was done explaining myself to anyone, done defending, done carrying what she thought of me like a stone in my coat pocket. What I didn't know, standing there that night, was what the next 4 years were going to look like, and what she was going to see eventually when she finally came up the driveway of my house in Prince Edward County. The house I built, almost entirely with my own hands, on land that everyone said I was foolish to buy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I should tell you who I was when the marriage ended. I was 57 years old. I had a bad knee from years of working construction and site management. I had a pickup truck with 280,000 kilometers on it, a storage locker full of tools, and a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building in Oshawa where the elevator was always broken. I had my pension contributions from 31 years in the trades, and a decent amount in my RRSP that my ex-wife's lawyer had already started circling. What I didn't have was a house. That was the part that hurt most, honestly. Not the marriage ending. We'd been strangers sleeping in the same bed for years by that point. But the house. We'd owned a nice home in Port Hope. 4 bedrooms, good bones, a garage I'd converted into a proper workshop. I'd put my hands into every corner of that house. New kitchen, rebuilt the back deck twice. Insulated the attic myself one November when our daughter was 8, and kept bringing me hot chocolate up the ladder. In the divorce, she got the house. My lawyer, a quiet man named, well, I'll call him my lawyer, told me I could fight for a better share of the equity, but it would take 2 years and cost me $40,000 I didn't have. So I signed. I walked away from that house in Port Hope, and I didn't look back, because looking back was the one thing I had decided I couldn't afford to do. My ex-wife told people I had agreed, because I knew I'd contributed nothing, that the house had been her idea, her choices, her taste, that I was the one who'd dragged his feet and wasted money, and if it weren't for her, we would never have gotten off the ground. I heard this from my brother-in-law, who heard it at a hockey game from her brother. I heard it from a woman at my daughter's shower 2 months later, who assumed I already knew what people were saying and mentioned it casually, then went pale when she saw my face. I didn't argue with any of it. I didn't call people to correct the record. I just stopped talking about it. Which I came to understand. Some people interpret it as confirmation. That's fine. I've made my peace with how other people read silence. The apartment in Oshawa was small. 1 bedroom, galley kitchen, a window in the living room that looked out onto the parking lot. The building was full of younger people, students from the college nearby, a few young families just starting out. I was the old man on the 3rd floor with the tool belt hanging on the back of the door. I won't pretend it wasn't hard. There were evenings that first winter when I sat in that apartment, and the quiet was the kind that presses in on you. Not peaceful quiet, the other kind. The kind that makes you wonder if you've made a series of small accumulating mistakes that have led you, by a route you barely noticed, to a parking lot, view and a broken elevator and a Saturday night with nothing in the fridge, but last night's leftover pasta and some mustard. My daughter called me every Sunday, without fail. She was the one constant in that period of my life that I can point to without any complicated feelings. Just love. She'd started dating a man she'd met through work. She was in project management for a civil engineering firm by then, and she'd invite me to dinners, include me in her life, make sure I wasn't disappearing into that apartment like something left too long in the cold. I owe her more than she knows, more than I could ever say. What got me out of the apartment, practically speaking, was the work. I had a good reputation in my field. 31 years in construction and site management. You build relationships. People call you. My old foreman had started a small renovation company in his retirement and brought me on as a consultant and occasional supervisor. Nothing glamorous. Mostly helping younger contractors not make the mistakes I'd made at their age. But it kept me moving. It kept my hands useful, and it meant that 3-4 mornings a week, I was up at 5:30, thermos of Tim Hortons on the seat beside me, heading somewhere specific. That matters more than people think. Having somewhere specific to go. It was during a site visit outside Belleville in the fall of my second year after the divorce that I stopped for gas and ended up talking to the man behind the counter. Older fellow, retired farmer selling the station, because his knees were going and his kids were all out west. We got talking the way you do in Eastern Ontario with strangers who have time. He mentioned, almost in passing, that his cousin had 40 acres out near Wellington, Peaside, that nobody wanted because the old farmhouse on it had burned down years ago, and the land just sat there being taxed. I don't know exactly what made me ask for the cousin's number. I've thought about that moment a lot since. Was it instinct? Was it that I was still, somewhere under the surface, looking for the thing that the apartment in Oshawa was not? Was it something as simple as being 60 years old and knowing, the way you know certain things at that age, that if you don't move toward something soon, you might just stop moving altogether? I called the cousin. We met on the property on a Tuesday in October when the light out that way turns everything amber, and the lake is just visible through the tree line. 41 acres. A ruined foundation where the farmhouse had been. A drive shed that had somehow survived, half collapsed but structurally interesting. Limestone outcroppings. A creek that ran along the back edge of the property. And a county road frontage that a decent engineer could work with. The cousin wanted $185,000. I offered $155,000, and we settled at $162,000 after a handshake and a cup of coffee in his truck. I used the RRSP money my ex-wife's lawyer hadn't managed to get. My daughter thought I had lost my mind. My son-in-law, they'd gotten married by then, a small ceremony at a winery out in Niagara, that I cried through even though I'd sworn I wouldn't, was more diplomatic. He said it was a bold move. He asked good questions about zoning and setbacks and soil conditions, the kind of questions that told me he was taking it seriously and not just humoring me. I liked him for that. My ex-wife, when she eventually heard about the land purchase through the grapevine, called our daughter to say I'd clearly had some kind of breakdown. I was already sleeping in the drive shed on a cot, working on the foundation by first light, by the time that message got back to me. I want to be accurate about what I built and how long it took, because I think accuracy matters here. I did not build the house alone. I want to be clear about that. A man of 60 with a bad knee cannot build a house alone in any practical sense, and anyone who tells you otherwise is either lying or selling something. I hired a crew for the foundation pour. I brought in my old electrician, a man I'd trusted for 20 years, to run the rough in. The plumbing had to meet county code, so I had a licensed plumber for the key connections. But everything else, the framing, the insulation, the windows, the drywall, the flooring, the cabinetry, the finish work, the deck, the landscaping, I did myself or with my son-in-law on weekends when he drove out from the city to help. He was good with his hands, better than he let on. We spent a lot of Saturdays out there, The two of us, not always talking much, just working alongside each other in the way that men sometimes do their best connecting. I moved in officially in the spring, 2.5 years after I bought the land. The house was modest by any objective measure. 1 story, so my knee could manage it. 1,200 square feet of finished space, with a proper workshop in a separate outbuilding. Good triple-pane windows that looked south toward the lake. A covered porch along the front, where I'd eventually put a couple of muskoka chairs and a gas fireplace I could run on cool evenings from April through October. The kitchen was the thing I was most proud of. I'd done it in white oak, milled locally from a tree that had come down in a storm on the property itself. The contractor who'd come to quote the kitchen at one point had looked at the oak I'd set aside and said it was the most beautiful material he'd seen in 30 years. I did the cabinetry myself. It took 4 months. I built it slowly and right. The land had been assessed at something around $280,000 with the improvements by the time the house was finished. A friend in real estate told me the whole package, house, outbuildings, land, was probably sitting at $720,000 to $780,000 in the PC market, which had moved considerably in the years I'd been building. I wasn't thinking about that number when I built it, but I knew what I had. The conversation that changed things happened at my daughter's house in Barrie, and it happened again because of our daughter. She'd had a baby, a boy. I became a grandfather on a cold Thursday morning in February, and I won't say much about that because I don't have the words that would be good enough. I'll just say that there are moments in a life that reorganize everything around them, and holding that baby was one of those. My ex-wife was at the hospital too. We were civil. We had learned, over 4 years, to be civil in the same room when we needed to be. It wasn't warm and it wasn't comfortable, but it was functional, and I credited my daughter entirely for engineering that outcome. It was about 6 weeks after the birth that my daughter asked both of us, actually, if we'd come to her place in Barrie for a Sunday dinner. She was getting back on her feet. Her husband had been going back and forth to his job site in the city. She wanted family around her, and she said so plainly. She'd always been plain-spoken. I don't know where she got it, certainly not from either of her parents. My ex-wife arrived before I did. She was already at the kitchen table with the baby when I came in from the cold, stamping snow off my boots in the front hall, hanging my coat on the hook my daughter had put there specifically for me. The one with the little wooden moose head on it, a joke between us from a camping trip years ago. Dinner was good. My daughter had made a pot roast. She'd gotten my mother's recipe from my sister years ago and made it better than anyone, including my mother. And we sat at the small table in her kitchen and ate and talked and passed the baby back and forth until he fell asleep on my ex-wife's shoulder, and she sat very still so as not to wake him. It was after dinner, when my son-in-law had taken the baby to put him down, and my daughter had stepped away to take a phone call from her office, that my ex-wife and I were alone at the table for the first time in 4 years. We didn't say anything for a moment. There was the sound of water in the pipes, the click of the heating system. She said, "You're still in Oshawa?" "No," I said. "Moved out to the county, renting?" "No." She looked at me with that careful look she had. The one that was calculating without quite committing to what it was calculating. "You bought something?" "Built something," I said. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You built a house?" "Yes." "On your own?" "Mostly, yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I didn't think you had it in you, honestly. Not on your own." I looked at my coffee. "I know," I said. My daughter, when she came back to the kitchen and found us both sitting in that silence, picked up the temperature of the room immediately. She always could. She poured herself a glass of water and sat down and said, casually, "Dad, you should have Mum out to see the place sometime. Now that it's finished." I looked at my daughter. She looked at me with those eyes she had, her grandmother's eyes, that particular quality of steady and unafraid. "That's a good idea," I said. My ex-wife said nothing. She came in May. She drove herself. I'd sent her the address and she'd put it in her phone without comment. She arrived at 11 on a Saturday morning, when the countryside out that way was just beginning to properly turn. Lilacs just past their peak, the fields that lime green color they are for about 2 weeks in late spring before they deepen into summer. I heard her car coming up the county road. My lane is gravel, about 200 meters is off the main road, and it curves through a break in the cedars before the house comes into view. I was on the porch with a cup of coffee when I heard her tires on the gravel. I did not go inside and wait. I didn't arrange anything. The house was the same as it was on any other Saturday morning. Tools on the workbench in the shop. A pair of boots by the front door. A book on the porch table beside my coffee. Whatever it was real. I hadn't staged it. Her car came around the curve in the cedars. She stopped. The car sat there at the bend for a moment, engine running, not moving. Long enough that I wondered if something was wrong. Then she came the rest of the way up the lane slowly, the way someone drives when they're not entirely sure they've got the right address. She parked and got out and stood beside her car door looking at the house. I watched her. She didn't speak. She walked forward a few steps, slowly looking up at the roofline, at the porch, at the stone pathway that my son-in-law and I had laid the previous fall, flagstone we'd pulled from the property itself. She looked at the garden. I'd put in perennials along the front. Coneflower, black-eyed Susans, wild bergamot, the kinds of plants that take care of themselves and come back stronger every year. She looked at the outbuilding behind the house, the clean lines of it, the cedar cladding I'd done myself. She turned to look at me on the porch. She said, "This is yours." Not a question. "Yes," I said. "You built, yes." She looked back at the house. She put her hand on the stone gate post at the end of the pathway. Left it there, like she needed something to hold on to. "I didn't." She stopped. Started again. "I didn't think." "I know," I said. "You want to come in?" She stood in the kitchen for a long time. I made tea. That's what I do when I don't know what else to do. I put the kettle on. Old habit from my mother, who was from Cape Breton and believed that the correct response to any human situation, from celebration to catastrophe, was a pot of tea and somewhere to sit down. My ex-wife ran her hand along the edge of the white oak counter. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the back of the property, the cedar line, the way the land dropped gently toward where the creek was. "This wood," she said. "From a tree on the property," I said. "Came down in the first winter. I milled it myself." She turned to look at me. For a moment neither of us said anything. Then she said, "I told people you wouldn't be able to manage, after." I set them on the counter. "I know. I said it because I believed it," she said. "I want you to know that. I wasn't just being cruel. I genuinely thought." She stopped. "I thought I'd been carrying the weight, that without me you'd fall apart," I said. "Yes." I poured the tea. "Did it occur to you," I said, not unkindly, "that maybe I'd been carrying weight too? Just not the same weight? And that when the weight changed, I found out what I could actually carry?" She didn't answer that. She looked at her tea. She looked at the kitchen, the oak cabinets, the light coming through the south windows, the quiet of the place, the particular quality that a house has when it's been built slowly, carefully, by someone who understood what they were doing and wasn't in a hurry. She said quietly, "It's a beautiful house." "Thank you," I said. "I mean that. It's genuinely beautiful." "I know you mean it." We drank our tea. After a while, she asked if she could see the rest of it. I showed her. The bedroom with the door that opened to the south-facing porch. The bathroom where I'd tiled the shower myself, 3 weeks of evenings after the main work was done. The shop, where my tools hung in the order I'd always kept them. The back garden, just starting to wake up. The raised beds where I was going to try tomatoes again this year, even though the seasons out this way were tight for it. She asked sensible questions. How long had it taken? What had been the hardest part? Was I planning to expand? I answered. It felt strangely, like a conversation between two people who were just meeting. At one point near the shop, she stopped and looked back at the house from the outside again. She said, I told our daughter you'd had a breakdown when I heard you'd bought land out here. She told me, I'm sorry for that. I looked at the house, the roof line, the way the cedar on the outbuilding was already weathering to silver. All right, I said. I thought I was the one who had the vision, she said. The one who knew what we were building toward. And you were just along for the ride. I know what you thought. I was wrong. The creek was audible from where we were standing. That particular sound of moving water over limestone, which is the quietest possible soundtrack, and also somehow the best one. You weren't entirely wrong, I said. For a long time, I let you be the one with the vision because it was easier. I'm not pretending that wasn't true. But easier isn't the same as necessary. She nodded slowly. What changed, she asked. I thought about it. The apartment in Oshawa. The October light on 41 acres. My son-in-law handing me a hammer on a Saturday morning. My daughter calling every Sunday. The baby in February. The white oak on a tree that had to come down. I ran out of reasons to wait for permission, I said. She left around 3 o'clock. She hugged me at the car, which neither of us had planned, and both of us accepted awkwardly and briefly. She said she was glad she'd come. I said I was glad too, which was the truth. I watched her car go back down the gravel lane and disappear around the cedar break. Then I went back up to the porch and sat in the Muskoka chair and finished the cold tea I'd left there and looked at my property in the afternoon light. My son-in-law called that evening. He'd heard from my daughter that the visit had happened, and he wanted to know how it went. He's a thoughtful man that way. He never pries, but he checks in. I've come to appreciate that about him more than I can say. It went fine, I told him. Better than fine. She see the kitchen? She did. What'd she say? She said it was beautiful. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, It is beautiful, though. I know, I said. That's the thing, it just is. I've thought about that day many times since. I don't tell this story to come out as the winner of something. Marriages don't end with winners. Anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't been through one. You come out of a marriage the way you come out of a long winter. Thinner, maybe, and quieter than you went in, and with a different relationship to what warmth actually means and where it actually comes from. What I know now, at 64, that I didn't know at 57, or didn't trust enough to act on, is that the things you build are not what other people see in you. They're what you see in yourself, eventually, when you get quiet enough to look. My ex-wife saw a man who needed her in order to amount to something. For a while, standing at that fence in Barrie, I was afraid she was right. That's the part nobody tells you about those moments. That the cruelty lands even when you know it shouldn't. Even when you know, somewhere under everything, that it isn't true. It lands anyway. But land isn't the same as stick. And what I discovered out on 41 acres of eastern Ontario limestone and cedar and creek water is that I had more in me than I or anyone else had ever given me credit for. The oak counter in my kitchen came from a tree that fell in a storm, and I thought nothing was going to come from. I let it dry for a year before I touched it. Then I milled it slow, by hand, and built it into something that will outlast me and probably my daughter and possibly her son. That's not nothing. Whatever she believed, standing in my backyard in Barrie with her head tilted, and her voice quiet and her certainty intact, whatever she meant by it, and however much she believed it at the time. That is not nothing. I know that now the way I know the limestone under my land. Not because someone told me, because I found it myself in my own time, at my own pace, with my own hands. And that kind of knowing I've found is the only kind that holds.